Hello and welcome to Build and Thrive, the podcast that is dedicated to improving the health and the happiness of the construction industry. I'm your host, Jennie Armstrong. And before we get started, I just want to say a big thank you to our sponsors, GKR Scaffolding, who are sponsoring Series 2 and also share our passion for creating a healthier and happier industry. So today's episode is really special to me, both professionally and personally. We're going to be talking about a project that has delivered some world-class engineering, but also been a project that has shown how we can really take care of its people. I had the privilege of working on Tideway for 7 years, and today I'm joined by two people that have helped shape that project. They also help shape my career and also the way that I look at the industry. So today I'm joined by Andy Mitchell, CEO of Tideway, and Steve Hales, the Director of Business Services and Health, Safety and Wellbeing. So both of you, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks,
Pleasure.
Jenny.
How are you?
Very good, thank you. Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, I know. It's been a little while, but
Mhm.
not too long. So both of you, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I really want today's episode to talk about some of the lessons that you learned from Tideway. Obviously, we're going to be talking about health and well-being and some of the things that you want, but hopefully, we can share some of those experiences and the other projects may be able to learn from in the future. So, Andy, I'll start with you. Can you just tell us a little bit about the project? I mean, a lot of people will know about Tideway, but share your kind of what we were trying to achieve and the vision of the project.
Yes, certainly. So Tideway Super Sewer, as it became known very early on, was a project about cleaning up or preventing the pollution of the tidal Thames from sewage. It's a long history. 2 million people in London when Bazalgette built the original system. We think he had 4 million in mind. There's now 9 million. Volumes are such that the system that has been serving London is still working very well. It just can't handle the volume. Hence, something like 40 million tons of untreated sewage going into the river every year. Our job was to build a system that would intercept the vast majority of that, which meant building up to these spill points that are in the river walls, north and south bank, building shafts, and then a long tunnel that runs under the river, 25 kilometers long. Guinness Book of Records, longest tunnel under a river anywhere in the world. Um, and we did that. It's taken us about 8 years of construction, 4.6 billion pounds. It's up and running. It's doing a great job. We're sat here at the moment waiting for some really heavy storms to put it through its paces, but it's been successful. The river's a lot cleaner. It arguably, I've certainly said in the past, and I've not been told I'm wrong, the river could potentially be cleaner than it's been at any point in 250 years. Um, it's a big moment in London's history as we saw it, and it's been a huge privilege to be part of that.
Brilliant. And I know, reflecting back on my time, and I've worked
Mm,
on other major projects, Tideway always felt quite different from the very
mm,
beginning. I suppose coming back to those very early days and the start of the project, can you reflect on kind of your ambitions for the project
mm.
and for what you wanted to achieve?
So yeah, I think there's two parts to that. One was we understood the challenge, the thing we had to build, the engineering effort, and that's fine. But I think an awful lot of projects kind of get their heads around that and stop. We also thought about what we were doing in a very different way, and we ended up talking about changing uh, or reconnecting London and Londoners with the River Thames. I remember using words like repairing a lost love affair between the people and the river, but all of that was about thinking more creatively and playfully about what we were doing. So I think that was having that second view of what we were doing was one thing, but the other thing was, we were going to become a FTSE 350 size company overnight. We're a startup, but quite a big one, and we had a clean sheet of paper. So when we sat down, Steve, myself, and the whole team, and said, "Well, what are we going to do on this front, and what are we going to do on that front?" It was kind of hard to say, "Well, why don't we just do something that's good enough?" We found it hard to justify. Well, why don't we do this the best we can? And then with that creativity, and then with that more open question, it allowed us to look at so many things and say, right, well, what would brilliant be? And that kind of defined our approach on so many fronts.
Mm, definitely. And I can reflect on those very early days and the stories you tell about everyone sitting around the tables and brainstorming,
Mm.
and that kind of message has stayed throughout the whole of the
Mm.
project and
Mm.
its entirety. So it's a great to see those ambitions realised. And Steve, obviously, one of the things from very early on, from a health, safety, and wellbeing perspective, was we're looking at how do we give health the same visibility as safety. And I go back to when I first started working with you, and it was something the industry was really struggling to understand, still being very safety focused. Can you reflect on what you feel about health, safety, and wellbeing, how it was so effective, and particularly around how we integrated health and wellbeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the first instance, it was some of the work that was being done at industry level.
Mm,
So you played an important role in the health and construction leadership group yourself. Um, and this was a group that had come together knowing that we hadn't focused on health and well-being in the same way that we had on safety. And then when we had the initial conference with the top chief executives at the Royal Institute, I believe it was, I'd reached out to Andy as the new chief exec of Tideway and asked for his thoughts on this, and he absolutely said he wanted to be front and center and talking to this group of people to talk about not just what health was costing the industry, but also how it could actually benefit the industry if that investment was there at the earliest stage. And he then obviously had the support of the Tideway board that sold this approach to having health and well-being on the same footing as safety. And from day one, and it remains the case to this day, it's been a corporate objective of ours to have parity between
mm,
health and safety. Um, I still don't think it's there, if I'm honest, but we had the backing of the board to do that. And we also
mm,
had the freedom to push those boundaries, as Andy said, to not accept what had gone previously as the norm, to really change that, to change the understanding of health and the understanding of well-being. There was an awful lot of confusion between the
yeah.
two,
Yep.
and that meant some education across all disciplines,
Mm.
but then an understanding that there was a blank sheet of paper that we could then say, right, let's try this out and see how we can grow in this space and start to redress that balance.
Yeah, and again, I think back, we always had that honest conversation. We wouldn't get the parity, so we were using words like we'll get greater parity and trying to push it. But I reflect when I speak to other colleagues that have worked on the Tideway and gone elsewhere and said, actually, yes, I really recognise that we definitely stepped up the mark and made those conversations happen. Didn't get it right all the time, but we tried, and there was new things that we were trying to achieve.
Mm,
And I suppose, Andy, the other thing I reflect on is the culture that was
Mm.
created. And again, the alliance and this feeling of one team. And sometimes, again, I see with other construction projects, they really struggle with client, contractor,
Mm.
supply chain relationships. Again, reflecting on that, how do you feel that you achieved, such a positive culture around this one team approach?
Yeah, so I think you've got to be bold, and I think you've got to recognize that as the client, you have the greatest position of influence of any of the players involved. Um, and it's got to revolve around trust. It's got to revolve around respect. And we all come to work to earn money. As companies, we come, we work to make money. Um, and I think you've got to acknowledge that yes, we all have basic needs, corporate or individual, and there's nothing wrong with that. And yes, you're going to have commercial
Mm,
differences of opinion, but that doesn't make somebody else bad. That just means they've got a job to do. And I think if you can continue to remember that about it is about relationships, it is about respect. You have to have trust. Now, it helped me because I knew most of the seniors in most of our supply chain. And I think, therefore, it was possible from the very top to establish an understanding that we were going to play as nicely as we could, respecting our own positions, and I think it started there, and I think the more that became visible, the easier it was for everyone else to play the same. But of course, that's got to work on the bad days as well as the good
Yeah.
days. It's easy to do all of those fine things when everything's going swimmingly, but the proof is when you're having to deal with something that is quite awkward. But
Yeah.
I would argue that's when it's even more important.
Yeah, and
That
it definitely tests the strengths of it.
yeah.
I suppose, Steve, maybe reflecting from yourself, is there any times that you look back and think about, those lessons where, it was tested, where the culture was how we do come together and collaborate? There's obviously with any project, naturally there's positives and negative times, and
Mm.
things go well and things don't go so well. Do you feel like there was
I,
any
I,
big tests?
yeah, I think probably the real test for Tideway was in the early days when you have a supply chain that's so used to having a relationship with a client of a particular type. And I'd like to think the relationship they had with us was different
Mm.
as a client, and almost believing that that was the new norm on Tideway. We were asking some really difficult questions. We were asking to push that envelope. We were asking to be transformational, but we couldn't quite define what transformational meant.
Mhm.
And this is a supply chain that we used to being given a list of things to do.
Mm.
And if I do the list, then I'm compliant.
Yeah.
We wanted them to be more creative. We wanted them to push the boundaries, and that took some time to bed in. But I think what became apparent very quickly was that they had our support in that they could challenge our thoughts. As Andy said, this has to be led by the client. I absolutely believe
Mm.
that. If the client doesn't set the bar and doesn't set the bar high enough, you will get what you've always got.
Yeah.
So we raised that bar, but then we encouraged, more than encouraged, insisted upon our supply chain challenging that bar and raising it themselves. And once that was understood and they had that freedom, they could challenge us on what our expectations were.
Yeah.
Importantly, we would listen. I've heard the phrase so many times of intelligent client. I think we were more than intelligent in the fact that we were empathetic, and we actually did listen to our supply chain. And when we got it wrong, we changed tack
Yeah.
because they're the experts at the end of the day, and it's not always a top down that works.
Yeah.
And that collaboration really helped us build that firm foundation to work from.
Yeah, I think I reflect back on, we were talking a lot about mental health in those very early days, and we had nothing in the contracts about any mental
Mm.
health initiatives,
Mm.
Yeah.
and it was probably the easiest thing to sell, and what they did with that without actually having any contractual instruction was yeah, phenomenal what they
Mm.
achieved. But yeah, they were
And
obviously.
sorry, and
Mm.
sorry to interrupt. That comes from building that
Yeah,
relationship,
yeah,
and having those conversations that you then allow, as I said, that freedom, but they then
mm,
take the impetus and take it forward, and they start challenging you really
yeah, yeah,
that there's more that can be done.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think we've seen that in that health and wellbeing space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we haven't spoken about the right way branding and the culture, but it had such a strong prominence, and the amount of reward and recognition, and the positive stories that was told with it. Again, a lot of it was coming from the contractors and them showing us what could be done. So it made it
Mm.
quite an easy job as a
Yeah.
client
Mm.
to make that happen. So again, I suppose, Steve, let's talk a little bit more about health and wellbeing. So I think the industry is now recognizing that this isn't a nice to have thing. There's something that you just do when you can. It actually is fundamental. When you look after your people, that's what will be a really great indicator in the project success. When you reflect back on Tideway, how much do you think the project's successes and what it achieved was because of some of the health and wellbeing agenda?
I think it's been hugely important. I have to be honest though that I think the well-being side has been more advantageous, possibly because it's an easier one
Mm,
to address. And as I said earlier, the challenge for us was understanding the broader landscape of health, occupational hygiene, and well-being, and making sure there was no grey areas and overlap. Well-being's a lot easier, but again, we took that beyond, kind of fresh fruit Fridays and then putting people
yeah,
through turnstiles into dusty environments and noisy environments and the likes. Um, the focus that we had on occupational hygiene, making sure that the contracts had a requirement for occupational hygienists to be directly employed on the program was huge. These are specialists that were then embedded within the contracts, that were imparting their knowledge across every day, across every shift, across every discipline, and in time actually upskilled people.
Yeah.
But I think the real thread running through all of this is a common theme that Tideway cares. And it wasn't ticking a box that this is a healthy thing that we have to do and this is a well-being thing that we want to do. It was a genuine caring from Andy, the board, and the rest of the executive team, that this was part of being a Tideway and part of a different program, really.
And you probably didn't even recognise what you were doing with kind of what you were setting up, and that caring feeling from a health and wellbeing professional. I've would write down like this is what every project needs to have, and I think it was just naturally your leadership style that created it.
That's very kind. I mean, I know I had a role to play, but if you sit back and think of it, and go back to the beginning of my career, we taught safety. And we talked about how many hours without lost time and those kind of things. And I worked in all sorts of different parts of the world and saw a broadly similar approach. But if you look at, so what are we trying to do here? Is it simply we're trying to avoid injury to people? Well, yes, of course, that's part of it. But why are we doing that? Is it just for the stats? I used to hear people talking about what's the business case for being safe, and I'd like to think we're beyond that kind of discussion anymore. But if what we were saying, and I certainly knew the culture that I wanted to be part of, and I wanted to see what influence we could have to create it. But if what I'm really saying is I don't want people to get hurt because I care about them. So I care about their physical safety. Well, then it is illogical to say, look, I don't want you to hurt yourself. I care about your physical safety, but I don't care about your well-being. I don't care your well-being physically or mentally. That's not a logical thing. And so if you wanted to put a logic to it, I would argue that you either care about somebody or you don't. And if you do care, it means all these things. I think you're right. This naturally felt like we care. Now, what does we care mean? And I think it came from there.
Yeah, it's very, very hard to define what that actually means. And it means different things to everybody. So, okay, I suppose now we're coming towards the end of the project, and your time is leaving. When you reflect back, Steve, what do you think some of the biggest lessons that you've taken away from the project? And if you were to start again, is there anything that you would do differently?
Wow, definitely. There's an awful lot I'd repeat because it's been such a success. Just picking up on what Andy said there, I think I've been fortunate to work in some excellent places over my career, but none comes close to Tideway. And I think most people who've worked for Tideway will probably say the same thing. And I think from my perspective, it's made my job really easy because you've got an executive team that gets it, that believes it. So I think taking that on to the next thing, I cherry pick those people to make sure that they get it, that they see that overarching benefit to the business. They see, as Andy says, that we care. What would I do differently? I mean, that's such an interesting one. I believe that we need to exert our influence on the industry more broadly. I think some of the things that Tideway have done have been fantastic, but I wonder whether they have been diluted when others have moved to other programs. And this is not being disparaging to any other program, but I think as an industry, we are not cohesive enough. We need to agree on some of the principles for good, sound health and well-being and commit to those wholeheartedly and collectively. And then I think we can start to move forward, and then you won't get peaks and troughs. of performance. I mean, I'm delighted to still hear from people who've worked on the Tideway program, and they've come to me and said, "Oh, Steve, it's so much better on Tideway,"
Yeah.
and that's excellent. But I also say to them, it's up to you to influence how things are on that program.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure how we would do that, but we need to be more, as I said, more cohesive as an industry to really change this. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going through the same cycle of trying to make this thing better, but
Yeah.
making the same mistakes and having to learn from those mistakes time and again.
Yeah, and it's very hard. One person might take those little snippets, but to actually then influence a whole program is very different.
Absolutely.
Before we came on, we were talking about shift patterns being a good
Hmm.
example,
Hmm.
and I suppose we worked so hard on the fatigue management. We from the beginning wanted to set a new benchmark around
Mhm.
working hours, what people did. And there was a lot of challenge because of the industry wasn't moving in the same direction, and there are other projects now that we know that still work in some of the really challenging shift patterns.
Hmm.
Seven night shifts in a row is not something that's going to help anyone's health, well-being, or safety.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, hopefully there are, as projects move forward, we can do more of this learning and
Mm.
sharing. But yeah, I think you're right. The industry definitely needs to think about how do we capture those things and
Yeah.
and continue to raise the profile.
That's a really good example that you give, actually. And as you say, we talked about it earlier on the shift patterns, but there will always be people that will happily work 12-hour
Mm,
shifts and do shift patterns of 7-3, 7-4. As you said, we challenged that. Um, and again, we had pushback on occasions when it was proving difficult and impractical, and we listened, but we managed fatigue in the right way.
yeah,
Previously, fatigue management reviews and the likes were tick box exercises. I think we really embedded within our supply chain the
Mhm.
importance of this, and not starting from the answer and working back, but actually do the fatigue survey
yeah,
and the risk assessment to get to the outcome. And we found that, and as you know, we did some
yeah, yeah,
12-hour shifts, but it
yeah.
was with the agreement of the supply chain. It was more importantly with the agreement of the people that were working the shifts, and it
Mm,
worked better for them.
yeah.
So that's an important way forward, I
Yeah,
think.
that flexibility. I think, yeah, we learned that, didn't we, early on, that
We did.
setting the 10-hour limit wasn't always the answer, but
No,
making sure it
it's
was
not
risk
binary.
based
Yeah.
and we can get it. And Andy, from your
Mhm.
perspective, you reflect back on the project. Is there any kind of key lessons that what you'd perhaps want other projects to reflect on?
Yeah, I remember one of the thoughts that used to go through my mind quite a lot around that sort of blue sky thinking, and we've got a clean sheet of paper and all of that. The expression, and if we did this and we were successful, whatever the subject was, never again could it be said this can't be done.
Mm,
And I think that as I reflect on so many of the things that we've done, because we won't know what would have happened had we not had the approach we'd had on culture, but um, I'm perfectly satisfied that the culture that we established was um, fundamental to the success of the delivery of the project. And I remember sitting in on conversations with people from other industries who were struggling with this profit versus purpose
mm,
argument, and I think surely Tideway has proven you don't these don't have to be in competition. You can have a successful business that is purposeful and thoughtful and with a strong positive culture. So I think we've proven a lot. Not that it's a simple case of right, let's draw up the 57 things that Tideway did, we do
yeah,
that, and everything's wonderful. But we've proven that um, situations can be created that are positive places where upon which you can build really successful stuff. I think the point that Steve made earlier about the difficulty we had in answering what does transformational mean, because it made total sense to
yeah,
us, but it was a bit. Well, I found myself saying, "Well, we know when we see it," and you think, "Well, that's a crap answer."
yeah,
So I think it if we were to go again, yes, the ambition would be there, but I think with as much structure or analysis, without shutting everything down, but as much clarity maybe. as to what does transformational mean, or rather, what could it mean?
Yeah.
And then being really clear as early as possible. Well, why don't we have a crack at that then?
Yeah.
I think that would have helped, because we were, to a degree, making it up as we went
Better
along.
idea now, though.
Well, yeah, we're better informed now,
Yeah.
and maybe that's
Yeah.
the important point.
Yeah.
Let's see what we can do to understand that better for
Yeah.
next time.
But you still don't want to get it to a checklist.
No,
Because
no.
your 57 items on your next program may well be different, but you need
Mm.
to have that freedom and flexibility and creativity that
Yeah.
allows the supply
Mm.
chain to continue pushing their own boundaries, as we
Mm.
mentioned before.
Yeah.
But as Andy said, we'd be much better at articulating what we meant by transformational nowadays. That's for sure.
It's not the what, it's the how, isn't
Yeah.
it? It
Yeah.
always is.
Yeah.
How do you approach things? How are you going to think about things? The what will come out of that, dependent on the people and the situation and everything else. It is being really clear on how you want to be.
Yeah, yeah. And quite hard to do that in a contractual world that we live in, but yes,
Or is
certainly.
it?
So.
You got to
Yeah.
you got to mean it. If you don't mean it,
Mm.
then don't say it.
Yeah.
And if you do mean it, you've got to back it, and you've got to be consistent with it. And I think that's what we've learnt and proven,
Mm.
that you can make stuff happen, but you've got to be bloody sure at the beginning that you are going to see it through.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you know yourself, Jenny, many of the things that we implemented in the early days, where we weren't necessarily as prescriptive within the contractual arrangements, that received some form of request for compensation or some sort of compensation event and pushed back, we got to a point where they weren't even raised. They were seen as the right thing to do. So we're going to do it. And there were zero cost changes.
Yeah.
And that's about the relationship between the client and the supply chain, I think. So there's an awful lot of give and take in that. And I think one thing that we haven't really touched on is that clients have to be prepared to pay. It doesn't always cost an awful lot, but clients do have to be prepared to pay. And I think sometimes they're just a little bit too keen to cut things too tight.
Yeah, yeah, and often health and well-being things are the things that
They're the things that go.
Get cut. And actually, when I talk to other organisations about how much is your budget, what do you set from the offset around this stuff, because it does cost money, and you would do it for safety, make sure you've got enough budget there, but really ring fencing that amount of money that is there to be able to do this. And they say the client has to do it.
We never really ring fenced it. I mean, the whole instructing the free issue of highest quality PPE, same PPE that I would be prepared to wear for everyone, that costs millions.
Yeah, yeah.
And the contractors rightly said, well, we haven't priced for that. Okay, I would go back and say, well, we didn't ask for it either. So if that's what we want and we believe that's important, then we've got to put our money where our mouth is. And it comes back to this: you either mean it or you don't.
Yeah.
And fine, just because you hadn't thought of that before doesn't mean to say you mustn't do it now.
Yeah.
And our joint agreed minimum standards, welfare provision.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are bronze, silver, gold, platinum standards of welfare. We insisted on them being platinum, at least.
Yeah.
And if we hadn't have put our money where our mouth is and said, well, okay, that's not what you priced for, but this is what we expect. And this is what creates the environment.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And creating that environment generates the culture that then
more
shows
respect,
that you care.
more trust, more these guys, these people mean it, or whatever. It's all part of a bigger picture, I think.
And that day one impression. So I'm walking on that site.
Yeah.
Obviously, we haven't touched on the Epic Induction and how impactful that was. But then, as you say, your money is where your mouth is, and walk onto a site, and it feels differently just to be here. And when you have people coming in and out, so quickly in that churn, how do you get people to feel that you care? And those are the things that mean a lot. I remember having workshops with some of the site workers and talking to them about, what would you like to see from wellbeing, from a wellbeing perspective, and all the answers always is decent food in the canteen and get paid properly, and that they wasn't interested in all these new innovative things. Once you've got those fundamentals right and their basic needs that they need, then that's when all of the other things were able to
the things the rest of us take for granted.
Yeah,
absolutely. Enough showers on site, showers that actually work, so that I can get washed after work and go home clean.
Yeah.
Simple things, and too often we cut those corners so that
Yeah.
we save a few quid.
Absolutely. I suppose, Andy, and looking at like the wider construction industry,
Mm.
how do you see things are, how the future is looking around things like health and wellbeing? Do you think the lessons will be learned from Tideway, or do you see potentially things slipping back to old habits or the way things were before?
I take comfort from the fact that 25,000 people have been through Tideway, will have their own impressions as to what it meant to them, how things could be. And I think that's almost invisible legacy that 25,000 people will take with them. Can't do any harm. I think it's always previously it's felt awkward to get out there and start selling the Tideway story because let's be honest, that annoys people. This is how we did it, but that's why I say it's not so much about look at what Tideway did, it's look at what allowed us to be that way and try and understand what that means. We could write the glossies, how this was done, and I've seen lots of projects do it, and I've never even read the ones that I've been on, let alone somebody else's. So I don't think that's the answer. I I'd like to think that we're a data point. I'd like to think we're proof of what
Yeah.
can be done. Um, I don't think it's a coincidence that the positive approach we've had on health, safety, and well-being has just been a reflection of how the project has gone. There is a correlation.
Mhm.
So I hope there is learning to be had, but I don't think I'm arrogant or naive enough to believe, well, that's it. No, now all everyone's got to do
Yeah.
is follow it. So room for hope,
Mm.
a positive evidence, but this happens because people want to make it happen, and if you're not there as a starting point,
Yeah.
I think there's an important thing. Andy spoke at the ICU recently about Tideway, and I think you quoted something that James Stewart referred to in his review of
Mm.
HS2,
Mm.
which I'll probably get the pronunciation wrong, but I think it was from a book that was called How Big Things Get Done.
Mm.
Apologies if I got that wrong, but I think it was from a couple of guys called Ben Flyvia and Dan
Mm.
Gardner, and
Mm.
basically said projects don't go wrong, they start wrong.
Mm.
And I think if that principle is there and you put health and well-being
Yeah.
at the center of things going right, then you've got a good starting block, I think,
Mhm.
for that is a real good start.
Brilliant. Um, I kind of want to talk about mental health, Steve, because obviously, when again coming back to the very early days, and you were fundamental in Mates in Mind and setting that up, and again come back to that time we were just talking about the suicide stats. We knew there was more work to be done. Again, I suppose reflecting on what we achieved at Tideway and where the industry now is. What's kind of your general feeling about what we did right around the mental health agenda?
Yeah, again, this was on the back of what the industry was talking about
Mm,
and how Mates in Mind was born, if you like, because we had quickly appreciated that there was nothing specific for construction in this space. Um, Society was starting to talk more about mental ill health, and again through Andy's leadership, and again at the subsequent conference, Andy spoke about his commitment to Mates in Mind, and that naturally flowed into our program. I think the important thing that we did, as well as working alongside Mates in Mind and starting the education program, things like start the conversation, manage the conversation, gave us currency, if you like, to have mental health conversations, and it was an openness to say it's okay to not be okay. We invested heavily in mental health first aid, as many organisations do, but we also realised that this was a reactive support mechanism, and we needed to do more at the front end. And again, I think that's where we need to come back to the industry more. The industry can do differently to be proactive and avoid the stressors that
yeah.
cause or contribute towards that to our mental health. We've done it quite recently, and possibly an area that we can improve, that we realise that coming to the end of the programme, the stress levels increase. So we use the HSE stress management standards to look at each of our areas, each of our directorates, and say, speak to your teams, how do they feel in each of these areas? And we did the traditional RAG statusing of those. And that gave us a good understanding of where the common areas were. Did we do enough in that space? Possibly not. If we had our time again, we might delve a little bit more, or maybe use that data to think about what needs to go in at the front end in anticipation of this, so you're not playing catch up. But nevertheless, the fact that we were openly talking about this on a regular basis, not just for World Mental Health Week or what, this was a drumbeat that we had. And I think one of the real points that I took away when we did our surveys, you led on the survey for us, and when I seen the response to the question that said, I would openly talk to my line manager about a mental health issue, and I think we had 78% of the population responded positively. That was huge. We've been in this game a long time. 5-10 years ago, we wouldn't have been having those conversations.
You wouldn't have asked the question.
Exactly. So the fact that we can ask the question, but now engage in conversation about it, and again show that we care, that it's not just something that's an initiative and something because everyone else is doing it. We understand how this impacts you as an individual, your workmates as a team, and the program more generally.
I think something that really struck me, because we've over my career, we've talked about safety, we've then kind of talked about health, and then into well-being, physical and mental, and that's been the progression. But as you guys were pushing out the whole mental health first aider training, and we all got trained up and all the rest of it. But when we first put sort of adverts on the site notice boards saying, is there anyone interested in becoming a mental health first aider, I thought this is going to be fascinating, and I expected almost no pickup, if I'm honest. The fact that we were inundated from the workforce, from multiple different employers, all saying, yes, I do. Had we done that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I don't think we got any, not even sure people would have understood what we were asking about. But I think there was a timing thing, for sure. If you go back 10, 12 years when we started, were we as aligned in our thing? No, we weren't. A lot of these things weren't there. But I think the fact that we happened to hit a point or be doing this at a time where society more broadly was talking about mental health was significant. But for sure, you couldn't start where we started 12 years ago and think you're doing a good job in terms of mental health. The world has changed.
Absolutely. And I think I remember having a conversation with you, Andy, about mental health first aiders. I know obviously you said, right, all of my leadership team, they're going to be mental health first aiders, they're going to go through the training. And I remember saying to you, I need to get some data to present back to you around how impactful this is going to be. And you said, I remember you saying, if it feels different, things feel different. It might not be that we're going to have some numbers that we've solved, all these mental health challenges that people are having, but we could feel the difference and the conversations that will grow in out of that. And I think coming back to your point, Steve, the conversations led by the client was so important. Us talking about the pressures of what's happened at this stage in the project, and opening that conversation, and we had regular meetings towards the end, and let's talk about it and get everything on the table. You're all safe to speak, and let's deal with those things. And we can't solve every single challenge that's coming through, but they felt that they could speak up, and there was the attempt and the effort to try and improve things. Don't always get it right first time, but that power of conversation and psychological safety, which is the term that we created. Okay, well, we're getting to the end, so I just kind of want to finish on some of last reflections. I suppose I'll come to you, Steve. Is there anything that when you reflect back on your time at Tideway, that you'd say that you'd want the lasting legacy to be around what we did, not necessarily from a health and wellbeing perspective, could be from other areas. Is there any kind of legacy you feel that the project has left?
Again, we've got 5 minutes, not 5 hours. It would go on, because I think it's more than one thing. That there can never be one thing. We always talk about how innovative our induction was. You mentioned
Mm.
Epic earlier, but if we'd only done Epic and Epic alone, we would never have got
Yeah.
where we are. If we hadn't have invested in the joint agreed minimum standards, we wouldn't have created the environments to allow people to thrive. But if we'd only done that, we would only got so far. If we hadn't have invested in mental health first aiders and conversations and occupational hygienists, all of those are in the health and safety space, but even that is complemented by how we invested in our diversity and inclusion program, how we took some quite thorny subjects at the particular time and held our hands up and said, we're naive and ignorant in this particular space, and I need to be educated and I need to be helped on that journey. The fact we showed a vulnerability, if you like, as a leadership team, I think helped.
Yeah.
Yada, yada, yada. And all of those things, I think, contributed and have contributed to where we are now. And I think, as a minimum, they have to be repeated. That's kind of where I'm at. It's not one single thing that I could put my finger on. It's the collective.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, Andy, now I've given half of Steve's answers, probably hard to answer. Have you got any kind of thoughts about what you want Tideway to be remembered for?
So I've often thought that on a more personal point, what is leadership? And I think a conclusion I've come to is, if you're the leader of an organization or an endeavor, I would argue, almost your primary role is you are the architect of the culture. And you've got to understand that's your main job. If I, as CEO of Tideway, was making 57 decisions every year, then I'm not doing my job. I'm doing 6 or 7 other people's jobs. And really being clear on what leadership is to you as an individual, and then translating that to the sort of the industry structure of what is a client. Broadly similar lines. It is the definer of how we're going to do whatever this stuff is. And I think being really clear, owning that, and then being consistent with it. As they say, if you don't mean it, don't say it. And if you say it, you've got to mean it. And being that thoughtful right up front will pay the dividends if you see it through. And I think ultimately it is as simple as that.
Well, thank you both. Thank you both for coming today, but also a personal thanks for everything that you've done for me. I mean, I definitely wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for both of you. And I know, Steve, you've been, fundamental in my career and motivating me to be able to do what I'm doing. So I will be eternally grateful for what you've done.
It was very kind.
No, thank you. And amazing work on what you've achieved with Tideway. It's definitely something that will stay with a lot of people for the rest of their careers.
Us too, I'm sure.
Yeah, brilliant.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you very much. So thank you to everyone for listening. Again, thank you to our sponsors, GKR Scaffolding. I'm your host, Jennie Armstrong, and I'll see you next time.